Welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk a bit about activity streams and also the Sparkle update queries. Unfortunately, Kevin couldn't be here today and he wrote that, so I'm not sure how deep we'll get into that particular one. I wanted to review those two documents. I don't know how many folks were able to attend the LD4 conference last week. I did give a presentation that sort of gave an update on what our working group has been doing, and I previewed a little bit the two documents that we're going to talk about today, but I definitely put them out there as like very preliminary because we hadn't even talked about them in our group yet. I thought we would start there and look at them from the perspective of, do they meet some of the challenges that we've identified? Also, like, are they sufficient to express the changes? And then just get some sort of like sense of pros and cons of what folks think about the particular two proposals. And do we need to look at other stuff? I had a pretty good conversation with David Newberry from Getty talking about their activity streams and also some other, he pointed me towards some other technology and stuff that we may want to look at and consider. But I thought we'd start here just to get us back rolling again as a group and then see where we want to go next. I do want to check in with folks because one of the things I like to do is see if there are any future topics that we should put on the list, if anything's come up for anybody that they want to expand at a later date. Okay. One other thing, I wonder if I could get someone to go through the participants and move any of the attendees that aren't here today to the absent. That would really help me out so that I can focus on the facilitation.
Lynette, I can do that.
Thank you, Stephen. We can look at the activity streams first. I don't know how much folks know about activity streams. This is a little bit of an off usage from the specification. I will say that I did some looking at Getty this morning, and theirs is structured in a more complex way, but I don't know that it's necessary for it to be that complex to express change. So I'm going to be digging into that more myself. And if anyone else wants to dig into it too, so we have multiple perspectives on how they're doing that, we can, that would be great. I would definitely appreciate more eyes on that in case I'm not interpreting things quite the same. So there are links to the two specifications that apply for what's in this document. One is the activity stream 2.0 as a whole, and the other is the sidecar specification. And what the sidecar does is it's defining things like these types: create, delete, update, anything like that. And if folks want, we can look at those specifications in more detail, but I thought we would just start with this. So some of the challenges that we identified were, how do you express the edges of a graph? How do you deal with blank nodes? What do you do with references to other entities? And on split and merge, some authorities are reusing one of the URIs after the split or the merge, and how do you deal with that? I don't know that this necessarily addresses all of those, but I think it does a pretty good job of addressing. So the first is, like, if you're just adding a new triple, and if it's a single triple, you can just put the single triple in there. So you identify it's a create, you give it some kind of message that says what's happening, and we could be more precise with an actor. I just put the actor down as the authority itself was the actor that made the change. And I think that each authority could decide, like, how granular do they want to be? Do they want to say what actual person made the change or just the authority itself? So you just throw in the one triple. If it's multiple triples, you could throw in multiple triples. And in this case, it's expected that each of these triples are being added. And if it's a blank node, since it's a graph, you just include the blank node in the graph of triples being added. And deleted is similar, so it's a delete type. So what's in the graph are all things that are being deleted. And I suppose the one thing this doesn't enforce is that if you delete this entity, and it doesn't exist in that subject URI doesn't exist anymore. You know, what happens to anything else that's referencing it? So I don't know if that completely gets it, but this is a delete with multiples and a delete with a blank node. And if anyone has a question at any time, just jump in and stop me, because otherwise I'm just going to kind of go through these quick so we can see how we express the various types we've talked about. So deprecate would be a create. In a lot of cases, just a create of the status of deprecated and what you should use instead. Some express it differently. So in some cases, it may not just be that if you've deprecated something, then some of the parts of the graph for that entity may no longer apply, and you may want to delete it. But also some are using a class in order to identify the deprecated. So this one is showing a changing the class from deprecated from authority to deprecated authority, and you set it. I kind of assume that you would set the new pieces first that identify the deprecation, and then remove anything that no longer applies. So the MADS authority gets deleted after you deprecate it, and then you do the any additional things you might want to delete. Like in this case, I said, maybe we don't want the broader and narrower to be pointing to this item anymore since it's now deprecated.
Lynette?
Sure, yep.
I don't know if we need a different example or what, but I wonder if, so I believe deprecated authority is a subclass of authority, and at least with LC, I think they just include the deprecated authority assertion and leave in the other, leave in the authority. I'm just thinking this through, trying to understand if that changes anything, other than the second half wouldn't have to, that second activity wouldn't need to happen necessarily, or maybe only parts of it. It would certainly simplify it.
Yeah, and I think my point of this document is definitely not to be precisely accurate with those kinds of things, simply because different places would interpret this differently. And so LC may want to leave the MADS authority in there, since both actually do apply if it's a subclass, or they may want to take it out. And if one authority wants to take it out and one wants to leave it in, I think that's fine. It's just to give an example of how would you potentially do deprecation the way that authority defines deprecation.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. But I did add the note there, and yeah, stop me at any time if there's other things like that.
In the chat, it looks like Tiziana was asking why deprecate was a type of creation.
Yes. So I'm glad you asked that, because the type is what is happening, and it's a create by adding these three triples, and this is a delete because it's deleting these three triples. So, and the way we know it's a deprecation is because it says deprecate in the summary. And I don't know if we want to do, like, one of the things I didn't care for about the way this is being expressed is I would like the types to be the types of changes we identified. And this would be a type deprecate. And then in the graph, is there a way for us to identify in that graph, add this and delete that? And someone did point me to RDF patch. Oh, actually, it changed to Delta. And it does have a way to add, and I don't know if they don't actually have a lot of examples in there. This is the old RDF patch, which that supposedly replaced. And they have add and delete. Sorry, I'm just kind of browsing through this. So this is kind of what the change would look like. You delete this triple, you add this triple. And so that's what a replacement looks like. And so it is possible that we could land on something like, instead of a create followed by a delete, which is very atomic, we could have a deprecate, and then there would be, add, an AAA in front of those, and a DDD in front of these to delete. So that is a possible shift we could make in this if we wanted to make those types match. At this point, I've only used 2 types in this whole document, create and delete, and those are supported by the subcars. So I didn't do anything that did change, because it, an update, because it would be hard to, without doing something like the RDF patch, it would be hard to identify what's updated, what was the old value, what is the new value, and how do you update your particular cache according to that. That answer your question? Anyone else have a comment they want to make about that?
So
I have a question related to the lack of example of type updates as well. And like in your first example of a create that adds a single triple, it's not clear to me whether that's an example of a triple being added to a graph or whether that's the entire thing.
Yeah, so in the way this is written, it would be like you have a cache that's in a triple store, or you have something cached somewhere in your application, and this is a new triple that's being added. So if you have an existing cache, this would not be an update. This would be brand new. So this triple has not existed before, and you want to add it.
But activities occurs within the context of individual authority descriptions. And I'm wondering whether there is a way to reference a particular authority record, let's say a record ID or some concept like that.
Yes, I have a lot of stuff open. I'm looking at some other windows, because what I wanted to show is what Getty does. This is how Getty does an update. They don't include any of the triples at all. They say it's a type update, and they give the ID of what's being updated, and then you're expected to dereference this ID and make it as a swap. So whatever you had for that ID before is gone, and this is what you have for that ID now. The challenge for me with that is, because we work with graphs, how do you know where the edges of that graph? And is it everything that just starts with that ID? All triples that start with this ID then get replaced by everything that's in this?
Yeah, they're treating that sort of as a document, and
Yeah.
and that document has its own internal borders.
Yeah, and I did actually, if you look in the Slack, I asked David quite a few questions about that to try and understand like where the edges are, and I'm gonna have to dig into it a little more to fully understand it. But it definitely sounded like anything that has this as the subject would be replaced, and that they also will pass in, for convenience, they'll pass in a label for another entity if it references another entity, but that's not considered replacement. That's purely for convenience. So I think the challenge in my mind is that the way this is laid out is more of a stream. You just apply it. So if it's a new triple, you just throw it into your system. If it's a delete, you simply remove it from the system, and you don't have to know really what entity it goes with. You don't have to know if there's other nodes that would be changed, because if there's another node that needs to be changed, like this blank node, then it's really the graph that comes with the create is expected to have it in there. And so you should just be able to process it from top to bottom. I don't know on the whole label change if that's sufficient. Is that where you bring that up, the question, Vitus?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm just trying to understand these examples. I skimmed through the specifications, and there, like for example, there is the object type graph. I don't see it in that activity stream vocabulary there. So
No, it doesn't. That's why I was saying this is a slightly off usage of it. And I don't know if we want to do this because it's not in the specification to have graph be one of the pieces. So I don't know that we necessarily can't create an extension like putting in a graph, but we certainly have to be aware that it's non-standard from the specs perspective.
And is that the same with the actor type authority? That's going to be an extension.
Yeah. That's also non-standard. They have, well, let's go see if we can look and see what. So I think this is a little easier to look at. So you can see they have a person, and I know there's another vocabulary that gives those types, actor types. So
Right, so I think that,
application, group, organization. So we could like use something like organization to be, organization or even service to be in line with the specification.
right, so maybe this, I don't know if I'm following your question. I'm gonna ask it and see if this is what you're trying to highlight. But in the examples we have here, it looks like it's hard to tell if milk is a new entity that has just been created and it includes this triple, or if milk previously existed and we're just adding this new triple. And
exactly. That's sort of what I was confused by the or the possibility of confusion of different interpretation of what this activity actually did.
right. Yeah. I hadn't caught that previously, but I think that's an important question.
That triggers implicit integrity constraints. Should it be a violation to add a new entity where the subject already exists as an entity?
Could you say more about that, Dave?
Well, it's sort of like having a unique primary key. If milk already exists as an entity, and I'm saying add this new entity, should it be a violation of integrity to attempt to add a second entity with the same subject URI?
Yes.
But I think in Lynette's examples, though, the entity is the triple.
But I don't think in Vitus's example it is. He's thinking about a record, not a triple.
Yeah, so in this example, milk may exist, milk may not exist. The particular stream is not telling you, it's just saying you need to add this triple. And it's not giving you any context about it being a new entity or not.
Yeah,
and
I know.
That was part of my hesitation or part of my discomfort, even when I was putting this together, was I kind of agreed that I think it would be better if there was a type create, and what create means is it's a new entity, and then all the new triples related to that entity should be in there. And then if it's a delete entity, and all the triples related that need to be deleted for that entity to be removed would be in there. And then there would be a deprecated type. So that would definitely be an extension. There is no deprecated type. So we would be adding our types.
And an update type that would change an existing entity by either adding something to it or removing something from it.
Yeah. And in that case, you would need like this RDF patch type thing, so that you could say this one's deleted, this one's added. so you could do a change. Like one of the examples I gave was a case change where you just went from a lowercase, all lowercase, to one that starts with an uppercase, which is exactly what their change is here. So you would do something like that. I'm not sure what their AR stuff is doing. I'd have to look at this more closely to see exactly what they're doing with some of their other stuff. But delete and add is the most common change that it's the only changes I was working with in the document. So one thing I could do is I could take another stab at this and change it from these, a series of atomic things that have to follow each other, to group them together. Every change that's related to a deprecation goes together. And so I guess the question I would have is, you've already invited us sort of ask questions about like authority being non-standard and use of graph being non-standard. How comfortable are we with making proposals with additional types and things like type deprecated, and later we're going to see type split and type merge?
So I guess in looking at all of this, did they have any notion of atomicity of these activities? In other words, if you don't have update as an atomic action, then you get into race conditions where in a concurrent environment, a live environment, if you do the deletions and then the adds to do an update, you can actually have other queries come in and find anomalous state, unless update is atomic, where you see everything or you see nothing of the update.
Right. So doing it, what you're saying is that doing it in a two-step like this with a create followed by a delete could put you in an invalid state.
Yes.
As opposed to having a chunk of graph that you apply at once.
It is momentarily in an anomalous state, correct. And it doesn't matter which order you do them in. You either have things in twice or you have nothing in there when you look between the two steps.
Yeah, I want to put this as a separate note.
In database parlance, this is part of ACID, where the A is atomic.
What word did you use?
ACID, all caps AHCID. It's an acronym for basically database consistency. And the thing is, this is true if the individual triples are added non-atomically. You can get into an inconsistent state with just multiple triples being added or deleted if the whole block is not treated atomically.
Okay. Yeah, so that leans me even more towards what I was saying before, of feeling like updating a type to have like a deprecated type where we could express all the change. And maybe graph isn't the right word to use if we're doing a, maybe it'd be something like patch. And then you have the RDF patch syntax.
The other thing about update, well, maybe even delete, is being able to wildcard, because your deletion example here requires that you know what all of the triples be deleted are, as opposed to saying, I'm just looking for anything that's got this subject and predicate.
Say that again. Oh yeah, a wild card.
Yeah.
I wonder if RDF patch allows for a wild card. So Vitus, when you were asking about these being like non-standard from the specification, does that cause you some concern specifically, or would you be open to, amenable to us having our own types defined?
Well, I was just wondering if they're not in the vocabulary, how do we, and if we want to use something like that, how do we get them in?
Yeah.
Or whether there might be another vocabulary that might be more suitable for the kind of activities that we are interested in describing.
And it could be that we just use object is, I think, their standard thing for this position. And it could just be that we call it an object. I mean, that's a pretty generic term. In our case, our object would be a patch definition. So any other comments so far? Observations or thoughts? Okay. So I did give an examples under change or different kinds of changes of just change. This is the one I was just showing you a minute ago of like saying it's just a case change. So we delete the old milk and then add the new milk, although you might want to do that in a different order. Actually, for a label, you might, I don't know. I think that would depend on the authority would have to decide what order they would want to do that in, depending on the constrictions of the ontology they're using. Except that, again, this brings in why the atomic stuff is actually very important, because if you delete the milk, somebody does a search before the new milk gets inserted, they won't even find it. So I do like the idea of some of the changes we've already talked about. Changing multiple triples at once, you can see that I deleted a few and I added a few. And if it's got a blank node, very similarly, this shows the blank node being deleted and this shows the blank node being added.
Lynette, I don't know if you're able to watch the comments, but Tiziana just made an observation about how there's no date stamps in any of these activities.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just curious, do they have, yeah, they have date stamps on those. I will add that. Thanks for watching that chat for me.
I almost responded in the chat. You're welcome.
So one of the other things we had was split, where we create the two new ones, and then there's a deprecation. So there's a create of new triples for the deprecation. That brings up an interesting question as far as the autonomy stuff goes. If we do a split, would you see this having, so these are related to the two new, would they be two individual creates? Create this entity with all of its triples, create this entity with all of its triples, and then deprecate this entity? Or would you see those all as a single split event?
Well, I guess one way you can think about it is consistency. So until you do the deprecation, the previous term is still valid. It's just that the other ones are additionally valid. But if you did it the other way around, where you did the deprecation step first, then you get into funky situation.
And so I wonder, I have to look at the spec to see if you can have like sub steps, because like what I would like to do if I were specifying this is I would like to say this is a split event which has sub events of create, and deprecate. And so they're still packaged as a single larger level split event. I don't know if activity streams allows for that. So that I would have to look up.
I think that's a clever way to maybe address this thing that we keep going back to, because a deprecate, or sorry, a split is not splitting triples, it's splitting the entity. And other activities that we have are about the triples, and we have like two levels of semantics going on here, the authority level and then the triple level. Because originally I do think it's important for us to have a way to know that authorities are splitting, but up until this point, well, I guess deprecation too, it talks about a certain type of triples being added. Or I guess it does talk about the authority too.
So are you, Stephen, are you suggesting there would be like 3 levels to this?
Well, I guess what the idea that we could have an activity that is about the authority that contains activities that are the triples seems like a nice way to be able to make clear distinctions, like that we have a new authority and that new authority includes these triples, or we have a deprecated authority and that deprecation activity includes some triples being added, some being removed. A way to sort of separate those two levels of semantics. I don't know that you need 3 levels,
So when you were saying it originally, I thought the 3 levels would be, the first level would be split, the second level would be the create, and the deprecate. And under create, there would be what triples get added. And under create, what triples get added. And under deprecate, there would be what gets added and what gets removed.
I see. Yeah, in that case, then.
That's why I was asking if that's what you were proposing.
I think you were further along than me.
As opposed to like the change we were talking about before with the RDF patch, identifying what gets, with the A's and the D's, identifying what's added and what's deleted.
Yeah, I think when you walked me through it, it does make sense that it would be 3 levels.
Okay. I'm going to stop there because I do want to look at a little bit at what Kevin did last time, because we had talked about doing these as Sparkle queries. And so he went through and did some Sparkle queries, and these are atomic because, so like right here, if you're changing the label, it went from dog catcher to dog snatcher with one query. And so everything is going to happen at once. So it does address that. And then you can, I'm not going to go through each of these either because you get the idea pretty quickly that this is what he does to do a new variant insert. Gives a couple of examples of deleting. These are very authority specific, but they can be, like if you have cached this particular set of authority triples, you can just apply these Sparkle queries and not have to interpret things and create your own update mechanism for applying it. I will say the one question I have is for folks who are where what you're doing is caching in your application, so you don't have an entire triple store. The concern I had was that if you go to apply something like this, it's like, how would you do that? Because if I'm storing the label dog catcher in my application, I don't have a triple store. And so I can't just apply that. I would have to interpret what this Sparkle query is saying and then see, does this apply to my application? What are others' thoughts about making changes through Sparkle queries?
Well, I think that also holds, Lynette, for your other examples, because you may not know what the blank node label is. This comes back to, you wouldn't be able to do the wildcard stuff unless you start doing regular expression interpretation of the cache if you're not using the triple store.
Do you think that we would have the same challenge? You were saying we would have the same challenge here if we were changing the label
You don't know what the blank node label is,
because of blank nodes.
because blank node labels are arbitrarily generated as you export. So from interaction to interaction, those blank node labels could be mutating on you.
So I thought you were going the direction of just having a blank node in general might be a challenge for applications. Because I suspect that applications, when they cache the label, just cache the label. They don't actually cache the triples associated with the label.
Not so sure about that.
I have some folks I can reach out to about that one who have an application where all they're caching is the labels.
Can a blank node be shared amongst other triples or multiple triples? A blank node, your subject, be shared amongst multiple
Yes,
triples as object.
yes. Oh, as object? I would still think yes. I don't think that's as common. It certainly is the subject, because I mean, you can say any number of things about through that blank node, with the blank node being subject.
But that means that the triple with blank node subject exists as a triple, not as some shortcut notation. Otherwise, you get into redundant mentions.
Yeah.
Well, what actually happens here, I mean, if you talk about Apache Jena, is it maps everything here to unique identifiers and only expresses subject, predicate, and object relationships using the unique identifiers, not as the text of the URI or the literal. So a blank node is just another variation. It's the unique identifier that comprise the triples.
It just has me curious here for a minute. So you're saying that in Jena, it would take this URI and convert it to a unique identifier for internal storage?
Yeah, because that's how they do the indexing.
Yeah.
Because they do permuted indexing. So they do subject, predicate, object, subject, and basically all the common access paths. From a storage perspective, they only need a unique identifier sitting on a persistent store. So there's actually an expansion lookup table that functions as a dictionary that when you pull it out, it looks up what to plug in that slot.
Okay. So I do want to go back over here real quick just to see, do folks have any questions? Do you want to look at anything deeper? If you have deeper questions, I think maybe we could hold them over till next time when Kevin will be present and he could answer your questions about the Sparkle query structures.
Maybe this will be worth talking about next time, but it's unclear to me if the delete and inserts are to a URI that is for a document or just like a wide open set of RDF. Because if it's to a document, within a document, do the blank nodes remain consistent? I don't know if that question makes sense, but
yeah, so I'll tell you what I interpreted when you said that, and that is that because this uses like a question mark S this could match any number of things. If dog catcher happens to be in there more than once as the authoritative label, it could match a number of subjects. And so should that subject be a specific URI that's being updated as opposed to a general search like that?
Right.
Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, or like in the next one, well, it does look like they're to a graph and not to a document, a specific, like nothing in here suggests that it's saying find this particular document and then construct or delete triples.
You mean unlike the second example where the subject is the LCSH?
But even there, it's still the subject is, well, I'm guessing that subject is the entity and not a like RDF document for the entity.
Can you say a little more about that, Stephen?
Yeah, so an entity there, I mean, in a lot of implementations of RDF, there's an RDF document. So like the .rdf or the .ttl, you know, like, so there's so when you the reference a particular version of the RDF, it has a URI for the document, the RDF document, and you could imagine writing triples to the document rather than true for the entity description. I can try to write what I'm thinking in Slack, because I think it might be easier to describe with an example.
Yeah, that would be great. And we can always update this after you have the example, and we can throw it in back in the document. We only have 5 minutes left, so I think I'm going to summarize real quick what I think the next steps are. I'm going to go back through this document, and I'm not going to change this one because just so it stays like it is and we can have it for reference, I'll make a second document that puts the changes, all the changes for a single change, like a split, everything goes together that's related to the split. And I'll rewrite the document in that way. For type, I will use the types that we identified, which will be non-standard to the specification. And I will add in some date timestamps. So I will take on that and create that second document. The other thing I'm interested in happening is for folks to look at some of the other tools. If someone has time to look at the Getty stuff in deeper look at it, that would be great. The RDF patch is another one. If someone could take that on. And one of the other things he mentioned was Memento, but I was not able to find that because there was a couple different things that Memento went to, and I wasn't sure which one he was talking about.
I'm wondering about the relationship between Kevin's Sparkle examples and your activity streams examples. the sparkles to me seems to be like a way to make the changes in your triple store, and it's not meant to be notification. But the activity stream is notification for others to be aware of what the changes are and do things within their own system. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah. So as you were saying that, it occurred to me that you could actually combine them and have not just graph that or patch, which I would change it to patch to identify what gets added and removed. You could also have the Sparkle query that does the same thing as part of the same document. So if someone has a triple store, they could just apply the Sparkle query. And if someone doesn't have a triple store and they're just watching for notifications of like a label change, they would have something that's a little bit easier to understand to make that label change in their consumer, in their application. I don't know if that answers your question though, Vitus, because I think that it's a possibility that you could express it one or the other way and still use activity streams. So what goes in that sort of blob, what goes in this blob could be what gets added or what gets deleted when it's atomic to create, or it could be the patch with the adds and the deletes all in one thing if we're doing multiple actions, or it could be the Sparkle query. And I think that's really to be determined. We're just starting to explore this as a group, and I'm not sure that, you know, we settled on anything. These are just throwing out some ideas for discussion.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Notification plus the actual commands for doing something together. That's interesting.
Yeah. All right, well, you know what, we'll talk about these other things. What I might do, if you watch Slack, I might post some things in Slack, and if folks are able to have time between now and next week to do a little more digging into it, where you could do like a report out next time of just sort of the highlights of some things, that would be excellent, to just sort of share the load on that particular activity, because I would like to do some due diligence in looking at how other folks are using these things. Oh, I know one of the other ones, just to mention it, was the IIIF change documents that they have, which doesn't directly apply to what we're doing, but is certainly similar enough that we could look at that and see what they've got going. I want to thank everybody for coming again. I think we're starting to make some, you know, turning a corner in terms of like coming up with some actual ideas around how we would express these changes.
Thanks, Lynette.
Thank you, Lynette.